While we all know and appreciate that when it comes to Donald J. Trump, an actual fact has never really slowed him down from stone cold lying about whatever it may be. And while I also understand you were told there'd be no math, in this breaking story, there's actually really important math. And it's going to be the kind of math that's really hard for Donald Trump to avoid what it's starting to look like. I'm going to show that to you in a few seconds, but on the heels of his big beautiful bill, my big beautiful bill, and when you see this breaking story, you're going to be like, oh no, wait, oh yes, check this out.
New this morning, CNN polling showing President Trump's so-called big beautiful bill that he just signed into law is getting some ugly reviews from voters. Roughly 6 in 10 Americans say they oppose the president's sweeping tax and spending plan.
We have to remember that there were more than 35% of Americans eligible to vote who didn't vote in the national election in which Trump got elected for a second time. Wonder which way it would have gone if they had.
But more voters than not say they do not approve of President Trump's priorities right now. One of those priorities has clearly been tariffs.
But in this breaking story, it's much more than that. When you start right now, key factor, as we all know in this country, is what percentage of Americans actually vote.
In fact, surveys now show the American people, by overwhelming numbers, hate the Trump Republican bill.
If we're talking about adjectives, how about they think it's awful, they think it's horrible, and to quote our colleague Charles Barkley, terrible, terrible, terrible. What are we talking about here? Well, let's take a look at the net favorable rating on the big beautiful bill. I don't just got one poll for you, Omar. I got 5 of them, and the net favorable rating, minus 19 points, Washington Post, minus 20 points, Pew Research Center, Fox, minus 21, Quinnipiac University, minus 26, KFF, minus 29. You don't have to be a mathematical genius to know that when the net favorable rating of your bill is somewhere between minus 19 and minus 29 points, that it is not a positive bill as viewed by the American public. The American public at this particular point hate the big, beautiful bill.
Those are the actual numbers that are coming back on how people feel about the elements of this piece of legislation that just went through. But in this breaking story, they're doing polling right now for the midterms next November. And Donnie, you might want to pay attention to some math. Take a look at this story. Breaking news. Democrats are far more motivated than Republicans for next year's midterms, CNN poll finds. Democrats are far more energized than Republicans about participating in next year's midterm, but deeply negative perceptions of the Democratic Party and its office holders raise questions about the party's ability to capitalize on that energy. Overall, 72% of Democrats and Democratic-aligned registered voters say they're extremely motivated to vote next year's congressional election, according to a new CNN poll conducted by SSRS. That outpaces by 10 points deep motivation among the same group just weeks before the 2024 presidential election and stands 22 points above the share of Republican and Republican-leaning voters who feel the same way now. But just 28% of Americans view the Democratic Party favorably, the lowest mark for Democrats in the history of CNN's polling going back to 1992. Still, only 33% hold a favorable view of the Republican Party, which is the smallest share in CNN polling since just after the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol. The poll suggests Democrats have a major opportunity next year, especially since midterms often favor the party out of power, but also a perception problem within their own ranks, particularly among younger voters. Republicans face several disadvantages. The American public largely agrees that full Republican control of the White House and Congress is bad for the country. 57% feel that way, with negative views of both President Donald Trump and his party persistent since spring. 60% say most GOP members of Congress do not deserve to be reelected. And the Democratic Party may hold an advantage among political independents. Nearly 2/3 of independents say a full GOP control of the federal government is bad for the country, and slightly more independents say most Democratic members of Congress deserve reelection, 38%. Then say the same about most Republican members of Congress, 33%. That gap grows to double digits among independent voters who are deeply motivated to vote next year. 39% say most Democrats deserve re-election versus 27% who say the same about most Republicans. though this is driven at least in part by the stronger motivation to vote among independents who lean Democratic. Democratic motivation to vote has spiked in the early months of Trump's second term. Among voters younger than 45 who align with Democrats, just 52% say most Democratic members of Congress deserve re-election and 48% say they do not. Older Democratic voters, by contrast, say these elected officials deserve another term by a wide margin, 76 to 24%. Nearly 6 in 10 Americans say most of the Democratic Party's members of the Congress do not deserve re-election. Democrats themselves are 7 points less likely than Republicans to believe members of Congress of their own party deserve re-election. Those historic lows on favorability are partly driven by Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents being less likely to have a favorable view of their own side. 70% of Republican-aligned adults have favorable view of the GOP, while just 58% on the Democratic side feel that way about their party. The Trump brand in politics. Trump won't be on the ballot in next year's election, but his presence is likely to loom large for both his supporters and opponents. While roughly 3 in 10 Americans call themselves Republicans, in a separate question, 37% of U.S. adults say they're political supporters specifically on Trump. A smaller share has backed his commercial ventures. 11% have purchased the president's products or stayed in his hotels. That small group is particularly loyal. They're more motivated to vote than other than Trump supporters, 62% compared to 45% among Trump backers who haven't done so, and are more apt to say that Republican members of Congress largely deserve re-election, 89% versus 77%. The president's self-described supporters are demographically and politically similar regardless of whether they have spent money on a Trump-branded item or hotel stay. They're largely Republican, more male than female, mainly white, and less likely to have a college degree than those who do not consider themselves supporters. But having spent money on the Trump brand seems connected to a deeper political commitment to the president. 73% in that group say they strongly approve of his handling of the presidency, compared with 44% among those who say they support him politically but haven't purchased a product or stayed in one of his hotels. At the other end of the political spectrum, roughly a tenth of Americans say they participated in some form of protest against Trump since his inauguration, with 8% saying they've shown up to protest in person. And let's all be reminded, because there's not much else to say, that's now. On the direction Trump is going, when there are more farm bankruptcies already this year than there were the entire year last year, we haven't seen the empty shelves yet because the harvests haven't fully come in. When things really start to get extra gross, what is Trump going to do? And oh yeah, there's that weird Epstein case floating around out there as well. You guys stay frosty.